welcome back to Formation. We're so glad you're with us for this series that is taking us through the busy season of Advent. We decided to be challenged by a resource that would kind of push back at some of the ways that we celebrate this season. And so we have Jan Johnson's book, Abundant Simplicity. My two friends, Kara Watts and Shannon Moore, are here, and they are abundantly simple in all of the best ways.
Okay, thank you for adding that part.
In all the best ways possible. and we want to. We're moving through this book, reading some things that challenge us, and some things that. Are you going to say anything maybe in our next lesson about something you want to push back on?
Maybe.
Or maybe not.
We'll see.
But one of the things that each chapter includes in this resource, which is all about the power of simplicity in our lives as believers, is in the chapter that we're on this week. If you have the book, chapter 7, The Intentional Unhurried Life. I love reading a chapter where just the title wants me to make some changes, and that would be this chapter. Start these two lists and then ideas that come to them as we experiment with the simplicity of time. How are we managing our time? How many things are we trying to pack into every day? And if you are in the midst of Advent, you're probably seeing just how many things you can pack in. All right, I wish I had more time to, and there's the blank. If I did, my next step would be blank. This is how we're beginning to kind of think about our management of time, how time comes to be one of the things we would really like to handle differently in our lives. I wish I had more time to
read.
If I did, my next step would be
stop watching so much television.
Those two. And so do you think about that regularly as you relax in front of your favorite program?
I do. Almost every day.
I should be reading.
I used to read all the time, and I loved to read. And I have found in the past couple of years that time has been filled with television. And that is... So as you were reading that, I was like, I know exactly how to answer
and for answer.
Question.
And you know what I feel like, and of course this is just me, and maybe you two as well. I think after a day of ministry, my brain is too tired to read. Doesn't it feel like there's some energy or some concentration required in reading? I can be in front of the TV and thinking about something else and not paying attention.
I do think, and I haven't heard any studies or anything on this, but this is just my own opinion. I wonder, I won't say I think, but I wonder if so much time in front of our computers and carrying around a phone, if we have moved, if it just seems more natural to watch another screen
see what you're saying
than
there.
it is to do something very different than we've done the rest of the day. Because when I was a student, I spent most of the day looking at a book, and then I would come home at night and read more. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if it's just if there's something about how your brain, what it gets accustomed to, like it just seems like more of an effort to read than it used to.
It's always been an effort for me to read.
But how would you answer this question?
I don't know.
I wish I had more time to play tennis.
Yes, I do. Absolutely.
That's your latest.
That would be my latest
If I did
thing.
have more time to play tennis, my next step would be what? You're already taking lessons. Buy more tennis rackets.
Well, I think my next step would just be to it really is kind of a community. I would be more a part of a community that's different than other communities that I'm a part of.
Okay.
I would say that.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I am in a phase of life though where I'm trying to figure out how to spend my time, and it's easy without being intentional to end up sitting in front of the TV and catching up on the shows that I haven't watched, or because I'm no longer doing any coursework. I'm no longer driving children around because everyone is a driver or in college at my house. And so it's just a really unique time to suddenly say,
So you're really thinking about the season
I
you're in.
am really thinking, and what to do with that
And then
time,
you get
and
to
not
be
just
thoughtful about it.
yeah,
Yes.
and not just waste that time, but also to just be willing to just kind of sit as well, and not feel guilty about that, which is kind of a unique
It is.
space to be in. So yeah, I'm thinking a lot about time right now.
All right, you two, tell me if you agree with this statement. We are what we accomplish.
No,
I
I mean, like our whole selves are what we accomplish. No.
All I'm giving you is this sentence, which is really only part of a sentence.
Oh.
I want to say no. I feel like that's the right answer, but I think I go in practice probably along the lines of that.
I would say absolutely from a theological perspective, we are far more than what we accomplish.
Yes.
But I think I live like I believe this.
Yeah, same.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fair.
In our business, we become addicted to fulfillment, which leaves little time for love to make its home in us. I like that sentence.
It's kind of a
Gerald
sad
May,
sentence.
spiritual director. Adrenaline becomes our drug of choice. In our business, we become addicted to fulfillment.
When I was in college, I played tennis, and received an award. And like 15 years later, they invited me to go back and speak at a banquet they had where they were giving the same award to current students. And when I look back at that, maybe it was less time than that, but when I look back at that speech, it was all about how busyness worked for me, because I was busy playing tennis, I was busy going to school, I was busy, in different organizations, I was busy in sorority, and my whole speech was like, just stay busy. And I look
Be
at that.
busier,
yes,
friends.
And I still won.
And I still got, but it was, I had no life experience to be able to look at myself even then.
Mm-hmm.
I was newly starting a family, life had still not slowed down. And I just look at that and I just think not being busy sometimes takes a long time to figure out.
Mm-hmm.
A really long time to figure out.
If we are what we accomplish and you surrender
Right.
that
Then what am I?
if you try to be instead of do, something sort of falls away
Yes.
and then you realize, oh, I was valuing that more than I
right.
realized.
It's interesting to look back on.
So one of the examples that we have in Scripture for what is sacred about time in particular comes from Genesis creation story. Who's got that?
I do.
And this is the Message translation, and we're getting towards the end of the days of creation. Read for us.
This is the end of chapter 1 of Genesis and moving into the first few verses of chapter 2. God looked over everything he had made. It was so good, so very good. It was evening, it was morning, day 6. Heaven and earth were finished, down to the last detail. By the 7th day, God had finished his work. On the 7th day, he rested from all his work. God blessed the 7th day, made it a holy day, because on that day God rested from work, all the creating God had done. This is the story of how it all started, of heaven and earth when they were created.
I like the way that particular translation is told. So God crosses a finish line. If we're talking about fulfillment, if we are what we accomplish, God has completed creation, that phase of creation. God says, now I'm going to take a break.
Take a little break.
And that becomes a model for us.
But there was also the acknowledgement of it was so, so good.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So that's not God just sitting around, carving, with a twig and a pocket knife. God's probably tired.
Time to make the Grand Canyon.
No wonder God needed to rest.
But we have the model of Sabbath. We have this idea of space. One of the things in this chapter that I like is for us to, the time that it takes, each time we accept a role, that we're going to play this role. And it could be, for faithful people, something very worthwhile. It could be volunteer work or teaching a Sunday school class. But each role demands time, but the role becomes precious to us. I think especially if it is the exercise of who we feel we are called to be as followers of Jesus. It's something that I've agreed to do and aligned myself with some of what Jesus teaches. And so we take these roles and then we can't quite lay them down without feeling like something good that I was doing is being given up on. Have you ever stopped doing something that was probably a very faithful thing for you to do, but maybe it was just too much?
When I was in college, I was very busy. I had lots of jobs and was going to school, and one of my jobs was at a church playing the piano, and they needed somebody to teach the youth Sunday school class, and I did that for a while, maybe a year or so, and it became such a burden, but I felt obligated, and just nobody else is going to do it, and I have to do it, and it won't happen if I don't do it. I mean, all of those roles,
Right.
that I picked, and they just became increasingly. And one day I just had it, and I went up to the Sunday school superintendent and said, "Today was my last day to do that."
Wow.
So.
And then did you have to kind of give yourself permission?
I did, but they had made me mad enough that day that I was okay.
So let's kind of take this job and I'm done with this job.
Oh, wow.
The suggestion here is that living up to a role moves us into the duplicity of insincerity instead of the authenticity of transparency, which is more valued in the kingdom of God. If you don't really want to do something, sit with that thought and ask God to help you explore it.
Right. That was me
On
doing
the front
that
end.
was about me.
Yeah.
And what somebody was going to think if I quit. Yeah.
It's interesting.
It wasn't about
We accept roles because we want to be loved and valued by others, because we want to be considered a nice person, a good person, because we have to show up at gatherings if we're going to have any friends. You know, you want to have a community. You want to be thought well of, because we're too embarrassed to admit we're exhausted and we need to rest.
Yeah.
If you're the person everybody counts on, well, I bet Shannon will help us with this. And you're like, I'm tired. I want to rest. And everybody's leaning back and looking at Shannon like, well, who does he think he is?
I certainly didn't win the tennis award.
All right, let's listen to one more. It's interesting as we're moving through the simplicity, when I hear one of Paul's letters being used in the teaching of these chapters, I think Paul is not, to me, a good example of the simple life.
No.
You know, and
Not at
he's
all.
regularly saying, and here's the list of
All the
everything
stuff I
I
did.
have fulfilled.
Right.
So,
Yeah, well, he starts
us
this
hear
out
it.
by saying, I'm not saying that I have this all together, that I haven't made, but I am, but I am well on my way, reaching out for Christ, who has so wondrously reached out for me. Friends, don't get me wrong. By no means do I count myself an expert in all of this, but I've got my eye on the goal, where God is beckoning us onward to Jesus. I'm off and running, and I'm not turning back. So let's keep focused on that goal, those of us who want everything God has for us. If any of you have something else in mind, something less than total commitment, God will clear your blurred vision. You'll see it yet. Now that we're on the right track, let's stay on it. I feel like it's like a coach. Like,
come on, we can do
yeah,
this.
like they just had a rough,
The coach.
game, and it's like,
Paul
come
is the
on,
coach.
here's what we're
Come
gonna
back.
do.
Get
Yeah.
back in the game.
You don't, if you can't see it yet, hang in there. Eventually, you're going to.
But
I also love all those buts.
But
I'm not trying to gossip, but
I wonder if you heard. One of the examples that she uses in this chapter that I really like is the idea of leaving margins in our days, in our weeks, space that's not committed for one family decided for the family calendar, one entire weekend every month, you could not schedule activities on that weekend because they were just going to be home. And you could never schedule 4 consecutive nights out or 4 nights in a row of meetings or small groups or whatever. And then the space that was created by blocking those time periods off gave them more enjoyment when they went out as a family, because they weren't just scrambling always to meet a deadline. So those margins, and one of the things that she says here in this particular passage is clearly Jesus had lots of margins, because all those times that people were able to stop and he would heal them, and we have all of those stories of him on his way somewhere. We can tell sometimes the gospel writer tells us where he's going, but we always know he's on his way. But he regularly stops to pay attention to people, and without margins, people then become an intrusion on what we're trying to do as followers of Jesus.
Right.
They become the problem. So I don't think Jesus would be pleased with that.
Yeah.
And we're out of time again because there's never enough time. See? That's an example of this. The intentional, unhurried life. There really is some great reading, I think, in this chapter. I think it speaks to anybody that lives in 2022. So I would commend it to you. And we'll be back for the final session of this Advent study next week. So we hope that you will join us. Thanks for being with us.
Take care.